2 videos in a week? What is this? Christmas?
Ho 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 ho.
Nah, I'm just really excited about Infinity. We've had 2 big tournaments take place over this past weekend, and with DLC Beijing just around the corner, it's a really good time to be up to speed with the latest comings and goings and developments in the Infinity format. So without further ado, let's get into it.
Hot dog!
Okay, so over this 30th May, 31st May weekend, we had 2 events take place. The first is ETB Newmarket 15K Infinity CCQ that took place in Canada with 212 players. And over in Belgium, we had the Lowlands Lore Quest CCQ with 133 players. 2 tournaments with wildly different results. If we just have a quick scan of the top 8s, top 16s for each of these tournaments, wow, at the Canada CCQ, lots of dogs, lots of amber emerald, but over in Belgium, almost no dogs at all. So what is it? Is it a confused, regional, isolated metagame issue yet again? But is the data actually that confused? We have to keep in mind, both of these CCQs, while they're still, attended by, 133 players, 212 players, these aren't 2-day DLCs playing more than 16 to 20 rounds worth of tournament for the winner. Both of them were 1-day tournaments. The Canada CCQ was 8 rounds cut to top 32 single elimination, and the Belgium CCQ was 7 rounds cut to top 16. So there's plenty of variance there in the formats for both of these tournaments to create somewhat wonky results because the sample size is somewhat small. So instead of looking at the top decks in terms of literally what made up top cut, I think for these type of 1-day tournaments, it may be more beneficial to look at the broader matchup and field data. If we compare the metagame spreads for both of these tournaments, they are fairly similar. The top 4 decks in terms of representation, the decks that players actually brought to the tournament, are Amber Steel, Amber Emerald, Amethyst Ruby, and Ruby Sapphire. Though, of course, in terms of the actual ranking, number 1, number 2, number 3, in different orders for both of these tournaments. Amber Steel was the most popular deck in both of the tournaments, though of course per the natural order of things, we clearly see that the Canada CCQ as a North America tournament has way more aggro in the form of Amber Emerald than in the Europe CCQ in Belgium. And if we compare the win rate matrix for the top ink color combinations between both tournaments, we can see that they're also roughly the same, right, for the top 4 ink colors. Of course, there are some differences, like for example, Amber Steel doing worse in Belgium than in Canada, and that's likely due, if you look at the stats, due to a big difference in the Ruby Amethyst matchup data. And by the way, I looked through the Steel Song and Ruby Amethyst deck lists in Belgium, and I can't really find a reason for why the delta in win rate for this matchup is so much worse in Belgium than in Canada. So I'm just going to chalk it up to an anomaly. But other than that, the other win rate data is fairly consistent with some variances that I would just chalk up to, general probability and variance in a fairly small sample size in both tournaments. Although a glance at the top 8 for both tournaments would lead you to believe that the results are wildly different, the underlying win rate data for both are actually fairly similar. So don't be fooled. In particular, Amber Emerald did well in both tournaments, as we can see, which brings us to our next topic. Amber Emerald Fort Dogs continues to excel. Alright, so the headline news from both tournaments over the weekend is that Amber Emerald Fort Dogs continues to be good. The primary variation of this ink color being Snow Fort Dogs. So you play both Snow Fort and Tramp 7 in the same list. Not just that, there was an even further innovation to the Fort Dogs archetype coming out of the Canada CCQ. This innovation taking the top 16 of the tournament by storm. We have 4 copies in the top 32, 2 copies in the top 8, and it's also the winning deck list. Essentially playing Elinor. The deck cuts piglets for 4 more 1-drops. It cuts daisy ducks as well. And instead of playing the piglets and the daisy ducks, it plays Bobby Zimruski and Aurora. And instead of playing Lady 5, it plays Elinor, new card from Wilds Unknown. And by the way, this winning list also cut 2 of the Snow Forts to play cheeky 2 copies of Under the Sea, which would be pretty good in the mirror, especially if your opponent starts inking their Ursulas because, they're not expecting Under the Sea in Infinity coming out of Fort Dogs, right? There's quite a lot to unpack here with these new innovations. Firstly, let's ask the obvious headline question. Is Elinor definitely better than Lady 5? I've watched some of the gameplay footage that came out of the ETB Canada CCQ, and to be honest, it looks like a little bit of a side grade, though there are situations where it is significantly better. So, the main advantage that Elinor has over Lady 5 is that as a 4-drop that does something good when you are ahead, it's a card that you can just throw down onto the board during the early turns and it potentially has a significant impact on the game, unlike Lady 5 where some action has to develop, some of your characters need to get munched before Lady 5 generates you any value, or you can get in a good shift and challenge in on top of your Lady 1 during the early turns if you are unable to get value by way of returning characters from your discard. Now, having your big play, your 4-drop, be something that you can just put down and do something once you take your character sideways is very well suited for the snow fort part of the deck where you just plan to turn your thing sideways as much as you can, and with Elinor out, of course, that's extremely advantageous. You get to draw a card, you get to ping 1 damage somewhere, you gain a lore, maybe you lose your small characters, but then you take next turn to rebuild a bunch of 3 new small characters using, of course, the card that you drew, and then you do it again, turning everything sideways again. And so this way you kind of attrition your opponent out while still maintaining card advantage to some degree because you are holding on to your Elinors. And Elinor in these type of games often just sits there. It's almost like a Prince John. You try not to turn it sideways because the effect is just too good. And it's also worth stating that when you are in these kind of games where you're just turning things sideways every 2 turns to attrition out your opponent, Elinor plays particularly well with Lilo coming out of the discard because it comes in exerted. So you save a card to play from hand, and also it's one less thing that you have to protect or hope it survives so you can take advantage of Elinor's effect on the turn that you intend to. Another advantage that Elinor has over Lady is that, well, on the face of the card, Elinor costs 4, whereas Lady costs 5. Now, this sounds like a relatively minor thing because both of them still at 4 cost and 5 cost tend to be fairly high-end plays for Fort Dogs. It actually can make quite a tangible difference in games, especially when your opponent is very alive to the possibility of a Lady being shifted out early or being played ahead of schedule with Grandmother Willow. They are going to start taking out these characters that subsidize your Lady, and sometimes there can be games that because it costs 5, you have to hard cast it at 5, which might take a resource away from you. Or there could be games that we saw in the video that I put out earlier this week where you just draw too many uninkables and you're unable to deploy your Lady 5s at all because you can't even get to 5 ink. Elinor at costing 4 is less prone to this issue. And also because it's a card that you don't mind just deploying early on, you are more likely to be able to take advantage of your Aurora triggers or your Grandmother Willow subsidies to play it, because the earlier you play Elinor, the more likely you are to have those characters sitting around early turns, unlike with Lady, perhaps those characters have already been taken out later on into the game. Of course, the trade-off with Elinor is that in games where you are quite far behind, it's quite likely that Elinor does absolutely nothing as compared to Lady 5. But I think the logic of playing Elinor in your deck then is that those are games that you're likely to lose anyway already with or without Lady 5. So you might as well change this card slot for a card slot that is more crushing to have when you're ahead in the early turns, because that's when Fort Dogs is at its strongest, in the early turns of the game. Of course, with Elinor's effect, you are more incentivized to play more 1-drops in your deck, which explains the other changes in the list. So Aurora as an addition to this Fort Dogs deck is obscenely clever because not only is it a 1-drop, it also accelerates out Elinor, and it also accelerates out Mulan and Cinderella, multiple princesses and queens in the deck. Bobby Zimmerowski is there, I imagine, so that you can elect whether or not you're doing more of a tramp style game plan or you're going more for the Snowfort style game plan, and also to discard the Under the Seas where they turn out to be not valuable, and of course to extract maximum value out of having Lilo within your deck. Last but not least, I want to talk about the trimming of the 2 Snowforts to play 2 Under the Seas. I think it's a clear nod to the fact that they are expecting to see a lot of mirror matches, other Amber Emerald aggro decks. Snowfort isn't particularly amazing in the mirror because the mirror is about who gets the turn sideways earlier most of the time. It's a bit of a race. And in these mirror matches, Under the Sea is obscenely good, especially if your opponent is not expecting them. So if you are piloting an Ember Emeralds Dogs deck, maybe a normal Shinodogs list, and you're playing against somebody that looks like Snowfort, start considering holding on to those Ursulas and playing them only after a Tramp 7, because you never know, they might be sneaking in some copies of Under the Sea into their deck. Now, to conclude, is Elinor definitely better than Lady 5? I don't think so. It's probably better in the mirror because it comes out faster and because that one damage ping can be quite relevant in the mirror, but it's worse against, cards like Be Prepared, like a big Sisu, for example. So potentially a side grade, but given what the meta looks like now, where there's likely to be a lot of Ember Emerald mirrors, I think Elinor is more suited for this current state of affairs. But in any event, it's good to keep up with innovations in the deck, and it's great that in Infinity, there are even innovations at all, and they're getting paid off for it clearly by finishing first place and multiple copies in the top 16 and so forth with this new style of deck, which also, by the way, I believe they did very well with a very similar list in Core Constructed as well. This same group of guys, they have a YouTube video they put out. I'm sure you've already seen it because it has more views than my videos. But yeah, I'll link it anyway, if you want to hear directly from the horses' mouths themselves. Okay, now let's talk about the ba-bam elephant in the room. Since there's so much chatter about it online, I feel obliged to at least pay lip service or to discuss it to some degree. Does dogs require a ban in Infinity? My opinion is very simple. Absolutely not. Well, at least not yet. Wait till this Infinity season is over. Why do I say that? Well, while Dogs appears to be the top performing deck, I don't think it is necessarily as a deck so oppressive that it deserves a ban. The fact is that there are answers in the form of whole decks in the format. Just earlier this week, I was talking about how Emeralds to Diablo might be a pretty good counter to Ember Emerald Dogs. And I don't think this new Elinor thing is going to change this that much. Even if we're not talking about whole decks, there are definitely specific cards that people can start putting more into the decks. Of course, we've seen Sisus, they can make more of a comeback. Madame Medusa is a card that hasn't seen a lot of play in recent Infinity tournaments from the list that I've seen. Headless Horseman, another card that doesn't see much play, could totally see play in Infinity as well to counter dogs, especially Tramp 7. Of course, most of these cards are Ruby, but you get what I'm saying, right? Options are available. I mean, the Spooky side as well. I mean, let's not forget about that. Plus, if you really think about it, what cards do you even ban? Everybody's saying Tramp 7, but is Tramp 7 even that oppressive in Infinity? Is it even the reason why the Snowfort deck is that good? Not really. I mean, Fort Dogs was already good even prior to Tramp 7 being added to the list. I understand it's pushed the deck to give it another dimension of play, but it's just that. It's just an option. If you've played against Fort Dogs a lot, or if you've watched enough of the Infinity tournaments, which I highly recommend you to do so, you will notice that the players ink the Tramp 7s quite a lot of the time actually, and they go for more of an aggro plan. It's really a matchup specific thing whether or not they want to play Tramp 7. If not Tramp 7, then what? Grandmother Willow? But that's one of the most answerable cards in the deck, right? One of the few cards that's very weak to Let the Storm Rage On. It can't be banning Lady 5. I mean, the winning list this week cut Lady 5. It can't be Snowfort. Shunner Dogs without Snowforts is totally a deck that's also been doing well over the past few weeks. So if you think about it, there's no one real card that you can name. And I think the fact that no single card, to me at least, stands out as being that egregious in Infinity is a sign that the deck itself is fundamentally quite fair. If you think that the combination of all these cards creates a machine that's too difficult to beat, it's not like these cards are unbeatably high power level by themselves. Just play something that hard counters this deck. I think coming from a background of other card games where, the best deck in the metagame can form 35 to 40% of the metagame and nobody would bat an eye. That's a perfectly normal thing to happen. And honestly, not necessarily healthy, but a fairly acceptable state of affairs. I feel like the Lorcana community needs to be a little bit more mature to the point where, as a player base, we are willing to bring hard counters to the best deck in the format that potentially loses to other things. Stop being married to your blurple style, feel good value, mid-range, tradey, everything's nice on curve, easy to play type of decks that would lose to dogs, play something that counters dogs and accept that you might lose to these value tradey piles, because in the long run, as more and more people gravitate towards playing the best deck dogs, you are going to see success with your hard counter. I think too many players in Lorcana are sitting on the value side of how they approach the matchups, especially from Europe and so forth. And they're like, well, if everybody's pouncing to counter dogs, then I'll just counter the guys that counter dogs. And that's why we have this situation where dogs wins all the time. It's a bit of like a prisoner's dilemma game theory, like failure here, that puts us in a situation where we are. It's not that dogs is too busted based on the cards that we have available. It's that players are not willing to bring the counters. Long story short, start packing hate for dogs, give up your feel-good value mid-range control decks, don't expect bans to bail out your suboptimal deck choices for tournaments. Alright, we're talking about competitive scene here. Let's get serious. People want to win Golden Mickeys, you expect them to bring the best stuff, and if you want to win the Golden Mickey yourself, you have to beat the best stuff. So start bringing your counters to dogs. Stop playing Blood Bowl. Alright? I said it. I said what I said. I want a mic drop, but I can't drop the mic. It's too expensive. Anyway. Alright, next thing that I want to be talking about this video, what exactly is up with Ruby Amethyst? If we look at the data from Dual Zing and all that, and even from tournament play, we can see it's kind of a 50-50 deck, so you would expect that more copies of it would be able to get into top cut, maybe even sneak a tournament win here and there, especially since it's okay into dogs, right? But of the last two tournaments that we've just discussed in Canada and Belgium over the weekend, with a total of 345 players, we effectively only have 4 of them that made it into the top cut of total of 48. 2 out of 16 in Belgium and 2 out of 32 in Canada. And this is while being one of the top 4 most represented decks in the Infinity metagame. So what gives? Well, my theory, looking at the win rate data and looking at the deck list, is that while it is a 50-50 deck kind of, it's basically too 50-50 a deck. It's too fair a deck that's getting squeezed by the metagame. Now, it's okay going into Fort Dogs, but it doesn't really have an I win button against them. Of course, it has Be Prepared, but of course, Fort Dogs has Ursula to stop the Be Prepared so they know you're hitting 7 ink on the following turn. And in any event, a Be Prepared is not that great when you're facing down, a bunch of Lilos in your discard, potentially, right? So leaving aside the Be Prepared, a big part of your game plan is you kind of want to match them turn for turn by not giving them an opportunity to quest, but at the same time, you kind of don't want to expose your good cards to a possible Tramp 2 to take them out and then enable them to quest. And now with the addition of Elinor to the deck to go with the Tramp 7s that are already there, they basically now are more free to turn all of the time. So while you're able to squeeze some value out of your characters, they are also getting value as well because the Elinors get value. So all in all, it's like an okay matchup, but it's not great, and your best card, they have an answer to in the form of Ursula. Of course, Ruby Amethyst crushes Diablo decks, what with your Jebediahs and your Peter Pans, and it's also now pretty good into Ember Steel, especially now that Ember Steel is moving away from a whole new world, so you get to attrition them out a bit. But it's decent, it's pretty good into them, but not by a huge margin. And mind you, even these a whole new world less Ember Steel decks have the nut draw of going Cinderella into an Akut, into an Aerial 3, into Beyond the Horizon, your entire hand away. Still available to them. And what do you have as your nut draw exactly? Not a whole lot, right? Again, a very, very fair deck. Doesn't do anything crazy busted. So overall, I think the deck is just too fair. It's very smooth to play, and it feels pretty good into other fair matchups, like say for example Blurple, because you have the Be Prepared to crush those matchups. And of course you can beat a cheesy Diablo coming down in the early turns. But essentially it's a deck that cuts out the tier 2 decks from doing well in the metagame, while kind of being okay so-so into the other tier 1 decks. And also, by the way, it loses quite badly to Ruby Sapphire Shark decks. Just can't seem to beat it. So how do we change this state of affairs for Ruby Amethyst? Well, I think the main way that the deck can adapt is to lean all in into your anti-aggro package. So we're talking about Headless Horseman, we're talking about Madame Medusas, definitely potentially over the Lady Tremaines that most people are playing. You could also play Demonas to force your opponent's stuff to turn sideways, which should also be good against your Blurple because of their ward characters and also good against Diablo decks. And of course, you can go all the way up to Sisu 8. So the tools are there to become this premier anti-aggro deck. You just need to embrace the classic RA package that is sitting there for you, especially if dogs are now moving away from Force No Forts. Your Medusas get better, your Sisus get better. You know, sound like a good plan? Come on, guys, you can do it. So then, to conclude my big picture thoughts, what is the Infinity metagame? We've had enough tournaments to come to a view as to what are the popular decks, and essentially your tier 1 is as follows. We have Amber Emerald in its various forms, those more commonly now with Snow Forts. With Elinor's maybe not, we'll see how that pans out going forward. We have Amber Steel Song, primarily in the non-Whole New World version because of the dominance of Amber Emerald aggro decks. We have Ruby Amethyst Bounce Control, and we have Ruby Sapphire Shark decks. The tier 2 of the metagame is formed essentially by all the Diablo discard decks and Blurple. Card packages may change, tech choices may change, but by and large, this is the metagame that you have to be aware of and should be expecting into any large Infinity tournament coming up. So if DLC Beijing coming up this weekend, we're going to have even more data and even more information before DLC Indianapolis coming in like 2 or 3 weeks from now. So stay tuned if you're preparing or if you just want to watch the show, preferably on this channel. Alright, so lastly, this last part of the video is going to be essentially a grab bag section of all the cool lists that did well in both of these two tournaments that I want to talk about. So the first is this pretty fascinating Ruby Sapphire items deck that was the winner of the CCQ in Belgium, won by Olaf Heron. I'm sure that's his real name. So the interesting choices in this list, as you can see, is to go back to the good old package of Chicha and Fishbone Quill, playing 2 Maurice Workshop as a draw engine, along with 1 Merlin's Carpet Bag. I think the theory of this deck is that you don't play any of your normal value glue cards at the 4 and 5 slot, like your Grandma Talas, your How Far Our Goals. Instead, you just play all ramp bangers for your matchup. You have your full item package with Maurice's Workshop and Lucky Dimes and 4 Tamatoas to beat Ruby Amethyst. We have the 4 Brawls for Diablos and sometimes Dogs if they play Tramp 7 too committedly. We have 4 Be Prepared and we have 3 Sisu for your Ember Steel and also for your Dogs matchup. All bangers, no breaks, ramp up. Hopefully your draws don't get too clunky with your items. And in the event you need to start playing value game plan with your Maurice's Workshop and your carpet bags, they are in the deck. So you'll be able to get there. Winner of CCQ Belgium, so has to be decent. Though I will say that in the face of Elinor, if that's going to be a trend going forward, I don't think this Chicha thing is going to last very long. It's gonna get pinged to death, pinged out of the deck list. Okay, second deck, Ruby Sapphire Actions. Now, I know in Index it says that this deck made second place, but this deck is definitely not second place because the finals of this tournament were available to be watched, and I've linked them in the description below. But this deck definitely did make top cut. Now, this type of deck, and I have a little bit of history. If people have been stalking on Duels Inc., a certain individual known as Sadler HS, or goes by that name on Duels Inc., they will know that this fella had in-core constructed in set 11, so Winter Spell, had been playing a list that looked very, very similar to this, just that it also had Robin Hood Sharpshooters. Well, now people want to play this deck in Infinity. Cutting the Robin Hood Sharpshooters because those are obviously going to be bad in the face of Brawl, in the face of Zeus. Yeah, honestly, I think this deck looks pretty terrible in the metagame or against a wide field because it can never beat a Be Prepared, essentially. But it's probably very good into Dogs because of the multiple grab repos. So, and in my time playing that Sadler HS core constructed list, I played like a lot of games with it. We were like spectating to get the full deck list essentially before he had tweeted it out or posted it anywhere. We kind of reverse engineered the deck, my group of friends and I, and then we just played the crap out of it. And the one thing that I took away was it really beats dogs in set 11. And I'm sure this deck beats dogs as well. So if that's something you want to do and you want to have fun doing it, feel free to go ahead and play this Ruby Sapphire actions list. Okay, last but not least, I saved this deck for last because it's my absolute most favorite thing that I've seen on Lorcana over the past few days. Red-Green Return of Hercules, baby. And this is the deck that actually finished second place in the CCQ in Belgium. So I've actually built a very similar list to this for core constructed back when Wilds Unknown was just coming out. I didn't think to go to Infinity, where you get Prince John, you get Diablo, you get the whole discard package to go with your Leviathan Return of Hercules game plan. Get out of here. It's genius. So again, board control plan of this deck in like the mid turns of the game is to go for Return of Hercules onto Leviathan, and you of course have to play something to set up the Leviathan, so it'll be strike a good match, or it'll be the 4-drop questing and discarding 2 cards and drawing 2 cards. And that's sick. Super, super sick. Of course, your early turns, the main thing you're going to go for is a nice Diablo high roll with your Prince Johns to back up with discard, with Lenny's and so forth. So I think the list looks fairly intuitive to play. Every card does a specific thing and you know what you want it for. Of course, some of the card choices in this particular list look a little bit loose to me. For example, the Maximus. I don't know what it is. I just hate Maximus. And the 2 Olafs as well look a little bit strange. But hey, go ahead, try the list, tune it up. I think this ink color combination deserves attention. It's not a popular one, and the fact that somebody did well in this with this in Infinity is a sign that maybe this thing has legs, and I'm going to be trying to play more of it in preparation for, Infinity tournaments coming up. All right, fellas, that's it from me for this one. Till next time, please like and subscribe. Thanks for supporting. I'll see you in the next one. Cheers. Bye-bye.